Okay, the metaverse. What is it? Let's begin by asking the most simple question, which is actually not very simple, but it's a conceptual question. So conceptually, what is the metaverse actually referring to? I think the metaverse refers to something very simple, a world within a world, or a world about a world. And so I guess one way to conceptualize what the metaverse is by viewing it as a layer. So you have your base reality, which presumably is this one, the one we're currently in. And the metaverse is the thing you step into while you are currently in the base reality. You know, you put on your Oculus Rift headset and you are suddenly in Paris, walking under the Eiffel Tower with your little batons that allow you to move your arms. So this is the metaverse. It's this abstraction that we can access from our physical body. It's a different physical environment that is, currently being virtually propagated. So yes, this is what the metaverse is. And today our technology is quite constrained, so we don't actually have a very sophisticated metaverse that exists. I haven't actually been on the metaverse, but I've watched a lot of people on it. And what have I seen them do? Well, I've seen them socialize. I've seen them go to gigs and concerts. Justin Bieber put on a concert in the metaverse. I've seen people work. There's like video conferencing, Zoom calls that you can take, but instead of sitting in front of your tiny computer screen, you have your big headset on and, you can kind of look around. You can guide your head around, this kind of thing. And everyone is represented by a little avatar character. And this is fine. It's quite strange, reducing an entire identity to a little abstracted avatar. But, ultimately, how is this different from social media? A lot of our communication is done via things like emoji and via little text messages, which are just words on a screen. And so ultimately, an avatar actually is quite a substantial improvement from words on a screen or a little emoji, because I guess it is more engaging and it does move. And, I imagine that as technology evolves, the avatars are also going to evolve. And so you'll have, face tracking. So the avatar's mouth moves, it's going to track your head gestures. I'm sure it does this already at some basic level, but the avatars are pretty lo-fi as far as I've seen. Okay, so there's like a very simple kind of grounding in terms of what the metaverse actually is. Now, I actually didn't spend much time unpacking what it is conceptually. I said at the beginning that a metaverse refers to a world within a world or a world about a world. And I actually think the philosophy of the metaverse is a lot more interesting than the kind of current technological status of the metaverse as a kind of grand financial and economic ambition by big companies such as Meta, aka Facebook, and other companies that have invested very heavily in creating a virtual reality. So conceptually, the metaverse represents something very beautiful, in my opinion. It represents, and I'm not talking about Facebook's metaverse, okay? I'm talking about a world within a world. Think about how many things we do in our lives in order to escape our current reality. We read, we socialize, we run, we exercise, we listen to music, we eat, we sleep. There are many things we do in order to kind of pull ourselves out of this reality or to give ourselves a break from this reality. And one very unfortunate thing that has happened is that, social media has become so addictive that has become one of the ways that people try to exit this reality by spending hours on TikTok or on Instagram. And, I'm guilty of this as well. I imagine the metaverse, for people who are very addicted to their phones, the metaverse is going to provide a more immersive and rich cognitive experience that isn't as kind of disembodying and kind of disassociative as the doom scroll, because it requires a lot more. It seems like it requires a lot more attention. It doesn't feel as though you can be as catatonic when you're interacting with a world within a world. Okay, so let's spend a bit of time thinking about this concept, the world within a world. What does this actually mean? So one thing that it might do, asking this question, what is a world within a world? One thing this might do is challenge our conception of what is real. Now, there's a lot of philosophy that is done on reality. What is reality? What are the kind of key components of a real experience? How do we distinguish between reality and dreaming? And the world within a world kind of makes this question, how do we determine what is real? It makes this more complex, because all of a sudden, when you're presumably in your base reality, but you're existing in your body in the present is existing in a virtual world and engaging in a virtual world. I'm certain that if you're spending a lot of time in a world within a world, after a while, it's going to feel very real. And you may forget that you're actually contained in a body that is elsewhere, in a different world. And so this is a very interesting kind of conundrum. Is it bad for us to be leaving this body behind when we go into the metaverse? Is it bad for us to be projecting ourselves very far away, elsewhere? Is that actually something that we should value? And this is where it's going to be helpful to think about, or to talk about some of the things that one can do in today's metaverse. What can you do in today's metaverse? As I said, you can attend Zoom meetings, you can socialize, you can go to concerts, but you can also do much more. You can work, you can earn money. And this is one of the most interesting political consequences, in my opinion, that we have seen so far in the metaverse. So, as I said, you can earn money in the metaverse. There is a game called 𝙎𝙤𝙘𝙞𝙖𝙡 Infinity. Funny name, I believe it's spelled AXIE Infinity. And it's a play to earn game. It's one of those games where, you click on a screen and you cast a spell, and then you take turns. It's kind of like Pokemon. You have your move, and then the opponent has their move, and whoever is more powerful or whoever does more damage wins. And when you win, you are rewarded. When you win, you receive a token, or X number of tokens. And you can convert these tokens to dollars, real dollars, and you can cash them out. And already we are seeing very interesting things. For example, in certain developing countries, people who are playing 𝙎𝙤𝙘𝙞𝙖 Infinity, this game that I've mentioned, they are already earning more than the average wage in the country by playing a game in the metaverse. At least very early on, it seems like it's going to be a great tool for financial emancipation. I imagine that it's relatively safe. You can do it just by being on your phone. You just I guess you need a power supply and cellular reception, and then, you have an income. And it doesn't require a tertiary education. It kind of dissolves all of these barriers which are in place and often prevent people from getting access to financial means or income. This is one very interesting thing that I have seen so far, and one interesting product that has emerged out of the metaverse. So there's the capacity to generate an income, which we are already seeing, and which seems to be a very important thing that is happening in the developing world, where the average income is very low. However, there are many negative features of the metaverse. And I think, actually, before I get onto the negative features, I'm going to talk about another positive feature. So I was recently having a conversation about virtual garments and what this will mean for fashion and for image and for representation. And so, you want to get that new Balenciaga top and it costs $1,000, and you're like, damn, I don't have $1,000. But all of a sudden, you have an avatar in the metaverse who is able to rent a Balenciaga top for $1 per day. And you don't need to go to a shop. You don't need to leave your house in the real world. You just go to a store in the metaverse, click rent Balenciaga top, and you've got the top for $1. So there's this kind of stuff. It seems like conceptually, the metaverse is going to be a place where size and body shape and body image and all of these kinds of things and branding and the power behind branding, all of these things are being called into question. And it seems like so long as it's safeguarded and guided by the right people, which I doubt it's going to be, because who's putting all the money into the metaverse? It's Mark Zuckerberg. It seems like there is potential for there to be another form of great political emancipation and kind of social equalizing in the metaverse by making things more readily available, having another opportunity to reconsider the cost of products, the cost of consumer goods, because consumption is going to be very different in the metaverse, right? Why would your avatar need to eat? Why would your avatar need to sleep? You know, in that reality, in the metaverse reality, what your avatar isn't going to have biological needs, unless it's kind of designed to. Brief side note, this reminds me of a story that I recently read by an American author called Ted Chiang. And he wrote a book of short stories, which is called 𝙎𝙤𝙘𝙞𝙀🙬. The stories drag on a bit, but the underlying philosophical questions and sci-fi worlds that he develops prompt us to ask very big questions. For example, what is the value of a virtual life? What is the value of a robot life? And this kind of thing. So the book's called 𝙎𝙤𝙘𝙀, author is called Ted Chiang. I would give it a 6 out of 10. Back to the metaverse. Okay, so far we've considered 2 potential positives of the metaverse. So the first possible pro of the metaverse is that it can be a space for people to access work and employment in a much more equitable and fair way than in this world, where you are not having to fight against social or geographical stratification. You don't have to travel on public transport to get to work, this kind of thing. There's this. And then there is the second thing I spoke about, which is the kind of accessibility to consumer goods. And so in the metaverse, you know, some very important things to think about are what will status look like? What will class look like? Because I think there is a real capacity for these things to be totally rewritten. And on that note, I think that ultimately the thing that I'm most fearful of in our transition into the metaverse and investing in the metaverse by big tech companies, one of my greatest fears is that we are just going to recreate the exact same political structures that we have today in our world, which promote inequality and injustice. And why do I say this? Well, for example, Snoop Dogg has a house in the metaverse, and you know, he holds private gigs there, little concerts, this kind of thing. Someone recently paid $500,000 to be Snoop Dogg's neighbor, to buy a kind of an adjacent block of land. So already we are seeing the creation of a class structure where, you know, if you want to be proximal to certain things, you need to have the cash. I read an article about a gigantic Canadian real estate investment company who bought a few $1 million worth of land in the metaverse. And so there's this kind of thing that's already happening. And this is obviously very concerning because, like, you know, we've learnt about the perils of colonialism. And, you know, if the lines between existing in a virtual world and in a real world aren't very clear, we should be very careful about how we allow ourselves to engage with this new world, because we don't want to reproduce colonialism. We don't want to reproduce enslavement. We want political emancipation and liberation. Okay, so that's a potential con of the metaverse, that we are going to see an identical recreation of late capitalism. Which is going to alienate and marginalize and segregate. So to kind of bring all of this back together, on one hand, I can see how the metaverse is extraordinarily promising and how, in terms of socializing and access and talking to family and friends, it is going to be the future of social media. For example, Instagram won't be contained to a small phone. It will be expanded to your entire visual field. And I suppose here we need to ask one of the most important ethical questions of all. What is the value of a life? Is the value of a life in the real world more than the value of a life in a virtual world? Should we be investing in the real world, or should we be investing in the virtual world? And I'm not talking about financially, I'm talking about existentially, our own cares. Should we even care about developing a character in the metaverse? Should I even care about developing a presence on social media? This kind of thing. All these questions are so interlinked. And so to conclude, ultimately, I do not believe that the metaverse will be extraordinarily different from our current circumstances. TikTok and Instagram are so immersive. When we engage with these platforms, we often neglect our most basic needs. We forget to breathe, we forget to stretch, we forget to eat. And, we feel totally ensnared and captured by this tiny screen. And now maybe if we have a headset on and, we're looking at an entire virtual landscape, maybe that will mean that all the kind of physical neglect that we get from looking at a small screen will be amplified by 1,000%, which, is apocalyptic. And I really hope that doesn't happen. But the point I'm trying to make is that we are already there. We are already inside the virtual world. Our reality is a reality within another reality. I have my real identity and I have my virtual identity. And the line between the two of them is not clear. This is not an original thought. Okay, so this was an unscripted and rudimentary insight into what the metaverse is, what it can potentially be, whether it's good or bad, and what some potential consequences of it are.